when families do get it right and they recognize within approaching a succession plan over time, there's an element that contemplates future ownership transfer. There's another element that contemplates aspects of what do we need to work through from a governance perspective, both from the business and in our family. Because everything you and I are talking about right now, as the family grows, it gets more complex.
Welcome to the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. Charlie is one of America's foremost authorities on respect and leadership development. And now, here's Charlie.
Hello, I'm Charlie Leichtweis. Welcome to another episode of the Power of Respect podcast. Today we are talking about the connection of family governance and business governance for family business. My guest today is Bill McLean. Bill is a partner at Richter Chartered Accountants in Canada, a business advisory and family office service provider where they help clients chart a clear path to shape their legacy for the future. His extensive experience includes executive coaching and leadership development, as well as having been national leader of the family enterprise and business services practice of Pricewaterhouse Canada. Welcome, Bill. Great to be with you.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Good to be here.
So, to me, one of the key elements of creating a lasting legacy in family business is the connection between family governance and business governance. And so I thought, we'd like to share some of your thoughts on the challenges you've seen in connecting those two together as you try to help businesses understand how they work together as a family and a business unit and creating their future legacy.
Sure. I've, the word legacy is just such an interesting one because this comes up all the time with family business owners with very few exceptions. These are individuals who don't look at a job as a job. They look at it as an absolute commitment to, the communities that they operate in, to the employees and the families that they support as a function of that. And the concept of legacy matters enormously to them in terms of, what events and actions have they taken throughout the course of the history of the family organization that leaves this lasting impact well beyond the time that they're at the business. I think the convergence, you refer to between the family itself and the business is this incredibly rich area where passion and sentiments are brought to the table equally with, a drive and a resilience to push the business forward. And I think, within that environment, there's enormous opportunity. And as you might expect, there's also, the possibility or probability there could be challenges from the standpoint of building that legacy across both sides of that, because sometimes they conflict with one another too. So it's just an incredibly interesting area to be supporting and to watch how it unfolds for these incredible families.
And some of the challenges, it seems, is on that emotional scale relative to how you want to make decisions, which is basically the broadest term what governance is. How do you make decisions? How do you make decisions for the business? How do you make decisions for the family? And as importantly, with respect to legacy, how do you make decisions for the benefit of future generations? Could you comment on your experience relative to that? I know you've seen a number of circumstances, and just give us a sense of what you've seen and how you've helped people work through it.
Sure. One of the things that I would call out in this whole area around decision making, and as you aptly called it, it's all governance, right? Trying to manage this and drive forward. One of the biggest things that comes as no surprise, but you get incredibly entrepreneurial individuals who have come into this environment. They are builders. They're architects of building out businesses that didn't exist, and that requires a real drive and a real ambition. What also comes with that in a lot of instances for, say, the first or second generation family members who are building these incredible legacies, it was much more of a focused entrepreneurial approach that had often a very centralized decision making. So you have mom or dad who are, leading the charge on this, or grandpa or grandma, and those decisions were made quickly. They were made in a very centralized way. As the years go by and the generations become involved in the business, of course, you're going to get a more complex setup. You have multiple family members that are coming in, and there can be some struggles with that whole approach to centralized decision making. And now you get siblings or you get cousins who really want to see more of a voting-based environment. or a consensus-based environment, and that can create its own challenges too. But it's that shift or the change that you notice with a lot of these family businesses, where they go from more of that centralized, very directive decision-making to one that requires much more open communication, much more collaboration, and also figuring out what systems you need to have in place in order to ensure that those decisions can still be made and affected fairly quickly.
No, that's so true. I mean, you think of the beginning, the founder, there may be 2 or 4 people as family members making the decision. By the time you get to G4, it could be 30 or 40 people, many of whom may not be ever a manager in the business or on a board if they even have a board, but all of which will have some kind of ownership stake or belief in that business going forward.
Exactly. And you also have, as you would expect, as time is going by and the family is getting bigger, you might even have a resistance to that more directive, centralized decision making because the family is that much bigger. And there's a belief, as time goes by, there's a belief for more open conversation and more debating, if you will. So you have to find the ways in order to enable that to happen, but still to ensure there's an effective decision making process so that the business can continue to run efficiently.
No, that's so true. So how would you see what I call generational engagement being employed, if you will, to manage those challenges of getting from 4 to 40 people and trying to communicate effectively and understand their wants and needs, not all of which will come together, but which have to be managed in that process?
Well, I think that's probably, and there's countless editorials written about this and case studies that are developed around this. You see the dynamics are so different at this point in time, because when you just think about generational engagement, think of to your point, Charlie, the 3 or 4 people perhaps who built up a business, but now you got 30 or 40 family members that all have various levels of engagement and involvement in the business. But now you're dealing with things like geographical dispersion. So you got family members that could be living all over the planet. We are a global community, notwithstanding the last few years, but we're a global community. So you've got people geographically all over the place. You have an emergent next generation approach that wants engagement. They want to be educated. They want to be able to ask difficult questions, irrespective of the generation. They've been raised in an environment to want to challenge that type of thing. You've also got increasing pressure in a much larger family to say, how do we still nurture family values, and how do we ensure the ties that bind, that keep us together, are still strengthened, even though we have so many people. So I think really, with all of this happening, the approach to ensuring that there is engagement, development, that there are programs that are in place that acknowledge all of these things are happening, because you're not going to engage that generation the way you would have engaged the former generation or former generations. So a lot of this has to be taken into account by families as they try to determine what their path is.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as I think of, you touched on a very important topic, the family values is a sort of the bedrock for going forward and trying to relate to multiple different generations. So how does generational engagement, how does it get employed to carry forward those family values and engage those people? And relatedly, how soon should you start that process?
Sure. So I'm going to answer broadly first. There are some families, just like anything else, there are some families who do a very good job themselves of being able to do this. They are very centered around their family values. They echo them and reinforce them. They openly discuss them. They come together in family environments and they just do it. They make sure that everybody's very clear on it. And then you've got other families where, as the family gets bigger and more complex, geography is a perfect example of it, that might not be feeling that they have been as effective at that. And then they will go out. If they feel that it is necessary, they'll go out into the marketplace and they'll find resources or experts who really can open up that communication capacity and have that conversation. Often in those instances, the next generation is being asked for feedback to say, how do you want us to approach this? How do you want to communicate across these family values? How do we resolve conflicts as a family while keeping a line of sight on our values, but respecting that there's quite a difference of opinion that could exist across the family? Those families smartly look and say, okay, we don't have that skill set cultivated within our family. We're going to get some support to do this, all in the name and the interest of keeping that family connection and the connectivity, but also, of course, keeping in the interests of the business at the same time too.
Right. How do we do all that and still be able to sit down at Thanksgiving for dinner?
and want to laugh together and talk
Yeah.
and all of those things. So on that note, Charlie, I'll tell you, there are some families really cultivate over time to say there's a time and a place for certain aspects of what we need to do. And I've had just great respect for families who say we ring fence certain times and say, this Thanksgiving holiday is about our family and the time that we're spending together. And it's a safe zone. There's a no talk zone around certain aspects, but at a different time in a more organized approach, of course, we can have at it at that point in time. So every family, either with help from other parties or they figure it out for themselves, is how do we establish what those boundaries are in order for us to feel safe and comfortable with what we're doing.
And those events and gets-togethers are not, in essence, a classroom educational process. It's let's get the siblings, the cousins together. Let's let them play together as children to get to know who they are. And that, granted, they're going to go back to their place in the globe where they live, but at least they'll have met them more than once a year, understood what they're thinking, understood what they're like, and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And you're calling out something that I think is so important, especially in the global environment that we operate in. Many of these families, they appreciate and recognize that connectedness has to happen, that there are, very decisive plans that need to be made to say at these different times, opt in if you can, but please be a part of this because we want everybody, to your point, to come together, to have play and fun time, to enjoy the fact that they're a family. And that reinforces the values just as strongly as an in-classroom session where you're talking through it as a family.
And it seems to me that they're able to at least talk about a number of things and understand who the family is. I've had a client that I asked him, who's the family? And the four gentlemen who were in the business said, we're the family. And I said, well, how about spouses? How about siblings? How about children? How about et cetera? And they said, well, they're part of the family, but they're not part of the business. And so connecting those two together, I did a survey for them of the entire extended family, asking them their thoughts of the business, their desires and sort of things. And some of them came back and said, well, I'd like to be part of the business, but I certainly don't like the way it's run today. And so for that to be an outside comment that no one's aware of and not grappling with in the right sort of way makes it difficult for someone to sit there and say, how are we going to create a legacy together?
Yeah. And and that call out, I'm seeing a real shift over the most recent years in engagement strategies that say an in-law, if you will, a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law is equally, if not more important, depending upon how the family is structured, because these are half of the parent within the family unit. There's huge influence there, and there's huge interest and commitment, obviously, to the success of the next generation and the children. So I'm seeing a lot of families that are shifting over, saying spousal or significant other or partner contribution is equally important to us. There may be some dynamics determined when it comes to vote or share a voice, so to speak, at the appropriate time. But a lot of families are moving down that path of saying we want to engage those significant others because they're a very, very important part of the whole family system.
No, that's so true. And another key component to me of legacy is succession planning, and generational engagement certainly informs succession planning if it's done correctly. What are some of your experiences there?
This is just such a huge area that continues to unfold right now. It's very easy within a family business environment to say we have no succession planning, right? We need succession planning, and often I'm saying this a little bit tongue in cheek, but often people think, oh, if we just had that manual or we had that document that calls out everything that we're going to do, it's all going to be perfect. Well, it certainly doesn't work that way, and let alone a family-owned business or a publicly owned business. But when families do get it right and they recognize within approaching a succession plan over time, there's an element that contemplates future ownership transfer. There's another element that contemplates aspects of what do we need to work through from a governance perspective, both from the business and in our family. Because everything you and I are talking about right now, as the family grows, it gets more complex, right? So there's different governance things that need to be contemplated both within the family and also in the business. And then there's another really important part too, which is the overall plan for management succession in any of the owned companies or the operating companies. And if each of those are contemplated distinctly And there's a plan that's put in place to say, what do we need to talk about? What are the areas we might perceive there could be future conflict? And how do we create better communication capacity to work through all of this? Then you start to see the real unfolding of a succession and transition plan.
Yeah, and it seems to me that relative to the succession of management, which may at some point in time be non-family member management, the question always seems to come up with, how in the world do I create governance structure when it's not the family in running the business?
Yep.
And so if you could talk about some of the succession planning challenges you've seen there, because sometimes if the family comes to the conclusion, boy, I don't know if I can really be involved or adequately understand the decision-making process, I should just get out of this business. And then the legacy sort of ends prematurely, potentially, in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair comment. I think understandably, often family members can become overwhelmed as they look at the specter of a transition coming and saying, we've got all of these things that we need to contemplate, and maybe it's better off if we cash out, so to speak, and have this be the end of the legacy. Having said that, a great many families take huge responsibility to the communities that they operate within and to the families that they support, and a determination often to continue grandma or grandpa's legacy and continuing to move forward with that. I think if you step back and you look at it, every business, family owned or otherwise, they share equal concerns around continued profitability of the business. What are the competitive pressures that are occurring now that are affecting that business? How do we have to engage innovation and adoption of change? What are the key relationships that need to exist in the business? And obviously, what's the return to stakeholders or shareholders? Those are not exclusive to a family business or otherwise. I call them out because within families, if they can have the right planning in place to ensure that they've got the talent within the family or in third-party contributors in the business, and you're calling out these areas that need to be considered, you've got a strong fighting chance that you can continue the legacy of the family business. If you lose sight of that and you're just focused on it's our family business and aspects of our family relationships only, then you might find yourselves in a bit of a challenging place where you don't feel that you've got the bench strength that you need to continue it forward.
No, that's exactly some of the challenges that are certainly important to everyone in the businesses, like the family businesses. It seems to me that sometimes it's not just the business that's the legacy going forward. There may be a place in time where the wealth generated gets repurposed or pivot to something else as part of their legacy. Do you have some examples of that you've seen happen?
Oh, definitely. Not to your point, notwithstanding an operating company or companies themselves, but very often as time is going by and the shift is happening from one generation to the next, there's a reconnection to say, where does philanthropy play in for us, for example? So is one of the bonds for us our commitment to charitable giving in the communities that we live in, and how do we come together and how do we work through that? There's also often a focus to say, how do we create legacy for our children as it relates to supporting the pursuit of education? And how does the family come together and say, within that wealth transition, what do we do to encourage and support the pursuit of enhanced education across the emergent generation? There's a host of different things that can happen within a family that's not just from an operating company standpoint to say, we want these to be the ties that will bind us going forward. And it will allow an emerging generation to begin further defining what supports the family values and what will the culture of that family be. So we see a lot of that focus in that area in order to pull families together.
The willingness to do that can also be based on how the previous generation treated the current generation. And as they understand, again, making a decision today for the benefit of future generations may mean foregoing something today. Mm-hmm. And that may be difficult. But if a generation in families had not done that, the next generation up may have learned sort of that habit, if you will, which then informs the fact that they are not necessarily in it for the long run. Do you have some experience with that?
Oh, definitely. There have been instances where, decisions are made to say, pardon the reference, but we have concluded that we're better apart. meaning we are still a strong family, but that which drove the family in the beginning in terms of the commitment to owning and operating a business is not the right fit for us going forward. And if that's a conclusion the family come to and they work through the process, you can still have a very amicable outcome and a very close family from that standpoint. Some people are just simply not meant to work together or to own together. What I will say though is that with many of these families, there's such a strongly distinctive culture on the commitment to the communities they're a part of, the commitment to, I say the three things, the communities, there's a commitment to the employees and the families who have their livelihoods connected to this, and then there's a commitment to the actual family itself, and that really drives a determination and a resilience for a lot of families to say, how do we work through this? How do we figure out what is the right thing for us? And the right thing could be a sale of the business, or the right thing could be an emergent new culture in the operating company. To your one example, it could be a team of third-party leaders where there might be less direct family involvement, but the family now becomes an owner as opposed to an operator of the business. And we see many instances of that happening too. And that can improve family relationships in some instances as well.
Yeah, and it seems that commitment to the associates, to the communities, et cetera, is also a key part of the generational engagement program, to help people understand what are our products and how do they help people, and what about the communities we operate in, and how do we affect those in terms of maybe a giving program that goes along with the business involved. You and I both know of one in particular where they actually allow the associates to choose what they think the investment in the community should be, and then they evaluate that and
Yep.
perhaps contribute to that.
Yep. And there's another, you just touched on something. This is also strongly emergent in the current generation, far more focus and a challenge determination to talk about environmental and social impact. And so an emergent generation, not to say that previous generations weren't focused on it, but current generations saying we want to know what we're doing to improve sustainability, regardless of what industry sector our businesses operate within. What are we doing to take our social responsibility so that as an emergent family member, I can be proud and be attached to what it is that we're pursuing going forward. So that whole area is one that, there's an example of the emergent generations are the ones who are driving as a force for good and a force for change. They're pushing that mandate significantly.
Well, that awareness and that commitment certainly will drive the desire for legacy.
Yeah.
Well,
and a reattachment in a different way, right? Than might have existed before, but all just as meaningful and just as important to the success of that family going forward.
And to your point of attachment, that could provide an avenue for some of the more distant family members who are not directly involved to have something that they feel strongly about that can contribute relative to the communities they live in, or relative to some part of the business in the area that it works in, and they have their input or discussion points for.
Yeah, very valid comment. There was once a time where the thinking was to be an emergent contributor as a family member, you almost had to have a bit of a cookie cutter or carbon copy background and experience to what exists today in the organization. Big change happening right now is saying what is diversity of thought, and how do we bring in, on balance of course, but how do we bring in some of this type of thinking to even challenge ourselves as a board, as a family, as a governance group of owners? How do we challenge our thinking? So there are entire programs now that are driving, embracing that across these family-owned enterprises.
Right. So tell me along those lines here, your perspective on the comparison of technical skills to run a business and family skills to be involved in governing a business.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because and I think it's a topic of hot consideration and debate for a lot of businesses, because it would be easy to say, okay, we need a set of technical skills, and again, wash, rinse, repeat. We need even more of that to come in order to keep moving forward. I think what we're seeing now is, of course, there are requirements in companies to ensure that the right level of technical capability is at the table. For example, would you want to have a business that the entire board is composed of no one with a particular financial acumen? or potentially operational expertise and background in a particular sector. No, you would not want to have that. It could be dangerous to the business. But a balanced approach that says we need to make sure, based on the needs of the business at this point in time, we have the right technical capability to support the needs of those businesses, and layer at the same time a diversity-based approach that says difference of thought and difference of background could take us into other directions and other areas of focus that could be very good for the business based on what's happening in the business marketplace these days.
And not just the specific profitability of product A, but in terms of the value that that business creates for the communities they're in and the people that work there.
Exactly.
I think that's the broader view that some people are missing, because we're also driven to look at the bottom line. Not that that's not important, it is to sustain things, but specifically when you're making decisions and have the capability to make decisions broader than that, that diversity of thought is very valuable.
Absolutely. And I'll add one other thing to this too, that diversity of thought that's brought to the table can ultimately create more of an environment for being able to adopt change successfully when you are having the different type of thinking that's coming to the table versus organizations that may historically be aligned to doing things one way in a certain way only.
Right. No doubt about that. Any tips on communication strategies you've seen families employ to meet these challenges?
Probably a couple of comments first. And the first one is, I am always surprised when family are, I'm just going to say it, almost embarrassed to say we don't have a developed capacity in this area. They often are very hard on themselves and think we should just be able to do this. We should be able to sit down, have this open discussion, whether by consensus or vote or centralized decision, we should be able to do this. And they don't realize that just like any other skill, it's muscle memory that needs to be developed. And the support, especially in a large complex family, the support that may be required to get them to a place where they can have more engaged, open communication may come from an outside third party to be able to help them to do that. So that's number one. Number two is being ahead of the curve enough to say we need to start planning this before something emotional happens. The unexpected death of a matriarch or a patriarch due to illness or otherwise. If there's anything about the last 2.5 to 3 years that we've all learned, is nothing is absolute, and we don't know always how things are going to go. So getting ahead of that and saying, what do we do even to start taking smaller steps now to move ourselves in that direction? And the last one is recognizing that everybody has a right to a certain share of voice. So to be able, doesn't mean everyone ultimately holds the keys to a decision, but creating an environment where someone can share, I think this or I feel that, is a family that's saying you have value, we want to hear what you have to say. Just creating that kind of go forward type of thinking significantly changes things for families as they start to embrace the transition.
And it ultimately can enhance the ultimate decision that's made as a result. It's interesting, you talk about consensus. Another client I had, they had several people in the management role, which were all family members. And the one gentleman who was elected to the CEO, he believed that to be polite and to create consensus for any decision making. Well, after I got to know him for a while and he trusted my comments, I said, well, the problem is you can't get anything done if you're looking for complete consensus. You do want to gather everybody's ideas and understand the context and let them have their say. But at some point in time, the information needs to inform a decision that has to be made.
Right.
And so I think it's a combination of hearing everything and then being able to turn that into action.
Yeah. And, to that point, as we say, voice does not have to equal vote, but voice is respected. Voice creates an environment for ideation and sharing thoughts and all of those things that can inform the vote without, to your point, dragging things on to the point where it grinds down to a halt because you cannot achieve a decision when you're trying for absolute consensus across the board.
You just used a word that's very near and dear to my heart, called respect, as you can see by the title.
Absolutely.
And the book that I wrote on the subject. So, respect is obviously one of the key hallmarks. It's not necessarily a stated family value, but it is a value of human interaction that can be paid attention to and used. I assume you find that ultimately that's another element of the glue that holds things together.
Well, 100%. When I'm asked to simplify down often at the front end of a family deciding, are we going to do this? Are we going to move into a more organized approach to planning our governance planning and our transition planning? I'm almost always without failures will say the approach that we're going to take is going to create a more respectful environment across the board. It respects differences of opinion. It respects everybody's willingness to share and create capacity for communication, but it will ultimately create better knowledge and clarity for everyone, even if it involves certain decisions that not everybody agrees 100% with.
Man, I know that's so important for people to remember. It's interesting, depending on personalities, the ability to listen is harder or easier. I'm an analytical person, so for me, when someone starts telling me a problem, in my mind, I'm down the road. I know where they're going. I know what the solution is, and they're looking at me like, "Dude, you're not listening." And I'm listening. And I got some pretty valuable advice about 20 years ago on that from a gentleman I know. It's one of these stories is actually in my book as well. He could walk into a room of 30 people he vehemently disagrees with, spend an hour, and when he came out, they're all asking, when is John coming back so we could talk to him? And I said, John, it's amazing. I said, you're a smart guy, but I'm a smart guy. How come I can't do that? And he said, I'll give you 2 words. He said, listen longer. And first of all, it's 2 words so I can remember it easier. And second of all, you may find that by the time they get to where they're going, it may not be where you assumed. And if it is, that's okay as well. I kind of marry that with another philosophy of mine. If you're right now, you'll be right later. So it's important to keep that in mind in these processes for sure. And it's not that easy, but we can work on it.
Agree with you completely. I think that's why for some families, it's a little bit more successful for them when they might be bringing in an objective third party, because that third party, depending upon the approach that she or he takes, they will command the listening that is happening. Whereas in some families, they might default to speaking over one another all the time, or the infamous yeah, but I think this, right? So I think often the bringing in a more organized approach creates a bit of a platform for everyone to say, okay, there's going to be listening and an exchange of ideas, and we're going to keep inching things forward.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Well, I really appreciate your time, Bill, and your thoughts. I know our audience will as well. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure. It's amazing work to do.
I want to thank Bill McLean for being with us today, and I especially want to thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Respect. If you like what you heard today, please consider sharing the podcast and visit our website at expertsinhow.com. A quick reminder, if you'd like to read my book, The Power of Respect in Business, it's available on Amazon. Look for my new book coming out soon, titled The Power of Legacy in Family Business. Thanks again for listening, and remember, respect builds trust, trust builds relationships, and relationships are the key to leadership.
This has been the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. To listen to more episodes and to learn about Charlie's leadership development programs, visit his website, expertsinhow.com.